Now, this story, I believe, is well known, even though it wasn't that well known to me. And funny enough, my best friend told me to do this story, and I said I might get around to it. And amazingly enough, I just bought 13 additional books off of Amazon, and they arrived today. And I randomly just pick up one of the books, and I go to a chapter randomly in the middle of the book, and it was the story that my friend recommended. So McGee, this 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, was a radio engineering student at Ural Polytechnical Institute, and he absolutely loved it. The only thing he loved more was the outdoors. Dyatlov was an avid hiker and skier, and when it comes to the near Arctic winter conditions that most would stray away from, he would consider it pure bliss. Dyatlov was highly skilled at hiking and skiing and had a grade 2 state certification to prove it. And on February in 1959, he assembled a team of 8 of his fellow students to go on a cross-country expedition to a mountain known as Gora or Torten, which is in the northern Urals of Soviet Russia. Out of the team of 8, 6 were male and 2 were female, and all of them were grade 2 rated hikers and skiers, which means they had a lot of experience and were very skilled at these crafts. A good friend of Dyatlov was named Semyon Zolotoryov, and he was one of the members on the team. Semyon was the most qualified among the whole group and was rated a grade 3. And the completion of this tough journey would allow all the other members to attain the same grade. To them, this was a great honor and something they really aspired to get. Now, the area that Dyatlov chose for this expedition was in the remote Sverdlovsk Oblast. I hope I didn't butcher that too much. And just getting to the starting point of this was a tremendous trek in itself. So first, they traveled by train to Ivdel. And from there, the hikers had an arduous, bumpy truck ride to a small town of Vashai. And they arrived on January 26, 1959. And the group of 8 were all in high spirits when they got there, and they were eager to begin this journey. So what happened is they turned in to get some sleep that night. Then they woke up early the next morning, and they were hungry, so they all bought these fresh loaves of bread, and they got their gear on, and then they set off into the vast white wilderness. And for one member of this hike, it would be of short duration, because he came into this journey with a knee problem, and on the first day, his rheumatism flared up, and it caused him such pain that he unfortunately was forced to turn back. Yuri and nobody else knew this at the time, but his knee injury that seemed inconvenient at that time ended up saving his life. Now, this journey would need some serious planning if it was to be completed without fault. And Dyatlov indeed did thorough planning and promised the director of his sporting club that he would send a telegram confirming his safe return the minute that he got back to Versailles. And that was expected to be on February 12th. But Dyatlov did voice concern to Yudin before they departed that it might take a few days longer than intended because of the weather conditions that seemed to just be getting worse and worse than anticipated. And Yudin then passed that message on. So when there was no word from the group by the anticipated date, there was no real panic, as this was almost now expected. But when February 15th turned into the 16th and the 17th and the 18th, the sense of alarm began to grow, and eventually on February 20th, the relatives of the students demanded that a rescue party be sent out immediately. After this, it was the head of the Polytechnic who arranged the first search groups, and it was made up of students, teachers, and volunteers. And after nothing was found, the concern continued to grow, and soon after, the military got involved, launching a major search with even more people, and now helicopters and planes joined the search effort. Now, it wasn't until almost a week went by on February 26 when some students came across their colleague's campsite, and it was situated on the slopes of Kholat Syakhi, which is about 6 miles from their intended destination. What was found was a single 10-man tent and was partially collapsed in the snow, along with a long cut running alongside of the tent. So they go to the tent and they opened it up, and there was nobody inside. But strangely enough, there were all of the hikers' possessions, including their shoes. And upon looking, they saw strange footprints that were leading away from the tent in their campsite. To be exact, there were 9 pairs of footprints heading down the slope to the tree line. Most were barefoot and some were in socks, and this can be seen from the footprints. So this huge question arose, and it was, where are the members of the DYATLOV party, and why did they leave the safety of their tent to take on the frigid elements in sub-zero temperatures without any of their equipment? Now, the latter of that question would be the basis of decades of debate and have never been answered to at least anyone's full satisfaction. And the former of that question would be at least partially resolved within the hours that followed. So at the forest edge, at the bottom of the slope, the searchers found the remains of a small fire, and right next to it were the first 2 bodies that were discovered. And they were 23-year-old Yuri Krivonchenko and 21-year-old Georgy Doronchenko. They were both shoeless and only dressed in their underwear. And it appeared one of the men scaled the Siberian pine tree that they were under to try to get a better look at the land. But at that time, it was pitch dark out, so it's likely they learned absolutely nothing new from this effort. Officially, both men died from hypothermia. Now, one of the female hikers suffered the same fate. Her name was Zinaida Kolmogorova, and she was found about 300 yards away, and she was found unfortunately frozen to death. Also, Rustam Slobodin made it about twice that distance and succumbed to the same elements as well. Then there was the expedition leader, Igor Dyatlov, and he nearly covered a superhuman 690 yards before collapsing and dying in the snow. So at this point, 5 of the 9 hikers that were missing were now found. The fate of the other 4 would not be known until May 4th of that year, when the snow started to melt and made their bodies visible. Now, these 4 were huddled together in a shallow ravine. Their names were Nikolai Thibaut Bignols, Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotorov, and Alexander Kolovatov. Once again, guys, I am so sorry if I butchered any of these names. But these 4 were a little more adequately dressed than the others, and it would later be revealed that they pulled the clothes off of their buddies' corpses in an effort to survive the frigid night. Now, this is where the story goes off the rails, and it is where the conspiracies begin. First off, it was the injuries of these last 4 bodies that sparked heated debate. You see, the other 5 corpses had minimal or no signs of trauma. But of the 4 hikers found in the ravine, 3 of them had fatal injuries. Thibaut Brignoles suffered a catastrophic head wound, while Dubinina and Zolotoryov had major chest fractures. Additionally, Dubinina's tongue had been ripped out, plus her eyes and her lips were missing. And Zolotoryov's eyeballs had been pried from his skull, and it's also to be noted that Kolovoltov had some grisly facial injuries as well. Now, who or what inflicted these wounds became subject of wild and sometimes even ludicrous conspiracy theories. Or are they? Now, the initial theory cited by the military was that the DYATLOV party had been attacked and killed by a local indigenous tribe called the Mansi. However, this hypothesis did not stand up to scrutiny because there were no signs of a struggle and no footprints in the snow other than those of the hikers. And in any case, the Mansi were hardly a band of bloodthirsty savages. They were a peaceful people who tended to their reindeer and generally avoided outsiders. After this, there was the official position that was put forward by the committee formed to investigate this tragedy. And this held that the group died in an avalanche. Now, the theory was that the hikers were awakened by a rumble of an approaching snowslide and that they left their tent in a hurry, not even taking the time to put on their clothes and shoes. So it would be at this point that they supposedly left their tent and sprinted for the trees in a desperate effort to escape the approaching wall of snow coming their way. However, in their panic, they became lost in the dark and separated into smaller groups. And they were freezing and disoriented, and then they perished one by one. The injuries were explained by a fall into the ravine and by the activities of scavenging animals afterwards. Now, on its face, this sounds like a plausible explanation. But if you dig a little bit deeper, you'll find out that this area was not known for avalanches at all. And if it was known for them, Dyatlov and Semyon, who were vastly experienced in this, would never have pitched camp in such an exposed position. It makes absolutely no sense. But let's assume that it was a once-in-a-lifetime avalanche that happened. But I must ask, where's the evidence on the ground to support this? I mean, this theory, because 5 of the 9 bodies were exposed on top of the snow, not buried in the snow, as they surely would have been in an avalanche, correct? Not to mention, where are the damaged and uprooted trees? Again, this would have been evidence even if there was a minor displacement that occurred, let alone a huge avalanche. So even though there were all these discrepancies, the committee still held that the verdict that the hikers were killed by a compelling natural force, and in May 1959 the case was closed. And the files and the evidence, they were sent to a secret archive which they would remain until 2019 when the case was reopened. Now, in the interim of this time is when a lot of conspiracy theories emerged. In the first one, it was that the hikers were attacked by a Yeti, also known as the same type of creature as a Bigfoot. Then there was the story that the expedition was actually a cover for a secret KGB mission and that they were ambushed by enemy operatives. And lastly, the other common theory was that there was some type of romantic entanglement within the group that led to a violent and ultimately fatal confrontation. Plus, not to mention there's also been some theories about UFOs. Now, when it comes to the mention of UFOs, this was because in the weeks that preceded this disaster, there had been reports of strange orange lights in the sky, and this drove the UFO narrative, but ultimately there was a mundane explanation, and it was that the Russian military had been testing parachute mines in that area. So now, with the UFO theory being supposedly debunked, in its place the military operations became the go-to conspiracy. Because what if exploding mines had panicked the hikers, causing them to run off into the dark? Or what if one of the mines detonated right near them, and that could have caused the catastrophic injuries seen in at least 3 of them? Now, several experts were under the opinion that the weapon in question would cause trauma very close to what was actually detected in the autopsies, but it didn't matter, of course. The Soviet Union military was never going to admit culpability, even if there was proof of wrongdoing. The initial public excitement and even the anger would ultimately die down, even if the mystery retained a near cult-like following into this modern day era. Now, we move on to 2019, when the case was reopened and the Soviet Union was long gone, replaced with a theoretically democratized Russia. There were genuine hopes that the secrets of the DYATLOV Pass would at least be revealed, and that the puzzle pieces would finally be put into place. But these hopes were dashed when the Board of Inquiry announced that it would only consider 3 possibilities. Number 1, an avalanche. Number 2, a snow slab avalanche, which is caused when a weak subsurface layer of snow shifts, displacing the upper layers. Or number 3, a hurricane. Now, avalanches, as we have already noted, were just about unheard of in that part of the Soviet Union. And when it comes to hurricanes, not a single one has been reported in the long history of that region. So take that as you may. Now, despite this, the findings of the commission was that it was indeed an avalanche that caused the death of all 9 students, and in doing so, it excluded 3 far more likely explanations. The first explanation has already been mentioned. It was the possibility of military weapons testing gone wrong. The second involves a phenomenon called a katabatic of descending wind. This hurricane force gale can reach speeds of up to 80 meters per second and rises up very suddenly, often at night, in ranges just like that of Urals. And it is also to be noted, a katabatic wind measuring just 20 meters per second killed a group of skiers in Sweden in 1978 in circumstances that were remarkably similar to the DYATLOV incident. And in that circumstance, the skiers all fled their camp in panic and died of exposure, and their bodies were found with only minor injuries, though, kind of like the first 5. The third explanation, originally suggested in Donnie Ichar's 2013 book, Dead Mountain, is that the winds blowing on Kholat Syakhi that night created a Kármán vortex. This natural phenomenon can produce low-frequency sound waves, undetected by the human ear, but capable of inducing physical discomfort and panic attacks. And it's possible that this is what drove the hikers from the safety of their tent into the frigid temperatures of the night. But just like all the other theories, this one is plausible, yet impossible to prove. Today, The DYATLOV Pass, also now known as the Devil's Pass, bears the name of Igor Dyatlov, the leader of this ill-fated expedition, and one can't help but wonder if Igor would have appreciated such a dubious honor. One day, we might know for certain what happened on the mountainside that night that resulted in the terrible deaths of all people involved. Well, either that or we'll never know at all.